There's nothing quite like the season of Lent, paired with a sermon series on money management to get you going on a Sunday morning. The combination kind of makes you painfully aware of our human reality. We've been discussing this reality the past couple weeks with regard to money and the hold that it can have on our lives. Being enslaved to money, whether it's debt, materialism, or what have you, is not something to take lightly. So, where does one begin on this fifth Sunday of Lent, the third week of our sermon series? There's just so much going on. There's, the whole season of Lent thing. That's worth explaining in its own right, especially since it's my favorite liturgical season, so obviously the most important. Then there's the whole thing about money management and living generously that we've been talking about. As Judy mentioned a couple of weeks ago, this is something that congregations want to hear about. But then there's also so much to be discovered in our text for today that we just read from Jeremiah and Psalms and Hebrews and the Gospel of John. So I ask you, Calvary family, where does a lowly seminarian begin? Well, with Wordle, of course. I don't know if any of you know what Wordle is, but I will explain. This is how all pastors and seminarians decide what their sermons will be about. Okay. So what you do is it's a website, and you take text. So what I did was I took the text for today, and I put it into Wordle, and then you click Create, and it creates a word cloud. And the words that appear most frequently will be bigger, and the words that appear less frequently will be smaller. So I made one for today. It's like, what am I going to talk about? Let's see here. So it looks something like this. And since I have a walking mic, I go over here to my friends. Hey, friends. So can you just tell me, what do you see as the biggest word here? Jesus. Well, that's reassuring, right? Pretty great when Jesus is the biggest word on your Wordle. What about the next biggest one? Lord. That's also, pretty reassuring for church on a Sunday morning. Well, what about the third word? Covenant. See? Pastor Brad Children's sermon, he's like, covenant, got it. Number 3 on my Wordle. We must have the same one. Right? So, the top, thanks guys, thanks friends. So the top 3 words on our Wordle for today are Jesus, Lord, and covenant. Well, Jesus is Lord, like that. We talk about that all the time. That's kind of old news. So we'll go with Pastor Brad and we'll talk about covenant. See? It's so easy. You should think about that the next time you're doing a talk or a sermon or a workshop. It's pretty great. So the definition of covenant, as the children were talking about earlier, it can seem to be fairly simple. It can be an agreement, a contract, a pledge, or a promise, like the kids said earlier. So I ask you now, rhetorically, you can think of it in your mind, and if you want to shout it out, that's cool too. But what kind of covenants have you made with others? Maybe you've made a covenant with a spouse or a partner to be married, to be faithful. Maybe you've made a covenant with a boss or a teacher to work really hard. Or maybe you've made a covenant with a financial institution to return the money that they borrowed you with interest. Student loans, I'm all there. So, covenants can influence the way we live our lives. They are promises that we've made with others. So, again, another rhetorical question for y'all. Looking at you, Josh. So who is influencing the way that you live your lives? Is it your life partners, your friends, banks? So covenants also influence the ways in which our biblical ancestors lived their lives. God made covenants with Noah, with Abraham, and with Moses. In turn, they live their lives in response to these covenants, in response to God's promises. However, much like how we sometimes don't act appropriately in response to our covenants, God's people didn't exactly live in response to the covenant that God had made with them. According to Jeremiah, and as Pastor Greg talked about, God is going to make a new covenant with God's people because they hadn't been faithfully living into the covenant that God had made to their ancestors. So this new covenant draws people closer to God. It draws us closer to God. With this covenant, God is our God, and we're God's people. Not only that, but we will know God. So we are drawn into a deep covenant relationship with God, in which God offers us forgiveness of our iniquities. God no longer remembers our sins, offering us liberation. How many financial institutions do that? So, liberation. This is what God offers us in the new covenant. Liberation from sin, death, and the devil, through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Eternal salvation is a gift given by God's grace, received by us through faith, and experienced as the promises of God. This is the message of our Hebrews text for today. Being in this covenant with God is a promise. I can't say that enough. This promise is liberation. Liberation from sin and whatever else ails us.